So could the next edition of 40K kick off with Blood Angels versus Tyranids? Let's talk Macrofexes, Primaris jump packs and Terminators with a look at some fun rumours. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought I'd get round to talking about these 10th edition rumours that have been floating around. I'm a little bit late to the party on this one, as they were posted early in the week, but I thought they could be fun to take a look at in a bit more detail, as I think if these releases came to pass they would make quite a few people happy. Basically, the next edition of the game is rumoured to be out somewhere in a year or so, and someone on Reddit is claiming to know the kits that are going to be released for it, giving us a breakdown of Blood Angels versus Tyranid kits that are supposedly going to be kicking off the new edition. I think as rumours go, this one's definitely a lot shakier than some of the others. The majority of what they've posted does seem pretty plausible, but just being a text-based leak from a single source, it certainly means that someone could just be getting a bit creative and posting a wish list. Even if we don't really know which yet though, I think it's still pretty interesting, and I feel like a lot of what they say does fit in with how Games Workshop would likely choose to update the Blood Angels and Tyranid factions. First up, just to mention 40k 10th edition in general, it is quite likely to be coming out in 2023. A few different sources have claimed that now. Games Workshop have been releasing the editions in 3-year cycles lately, and I don't really think it's in their interest to slow down particularly, as when they've released both 8th edition and 9th edition, it's created massive amounts of hype, and they've sold absolutely tons of those starter sets. Most of the 9th codexes have been released. There's only 5 that we know are still to come: Demons, Leagues of Votan, Imperial Guard, World Eaters, and Space Marines version 2. Supposedly Codex Space Marines releasing alongside the supplements for things like Ultramarines. Previously, over the last few editions, they've tended to finish off the edition with some sort of campaign or supplement release series. In 8th edition we had Psychic Awakening, where they cycled through all the codexes again, giving them some new rules and often some new models too. But I do wonder whether or not they're going to do that in the same style this time round. We have been getting all of those Warzone releases throughout 9th edition, and I do wonder if they're basically the equivalent of what we would have had as a campaign at the end of it, just decided to be drip-fed throughout rather than come all at the end. I guess they could go down another route for ending the edition, perhaps something like one of their global campaigns where they get lots of people to play games and enter data. In any case, whether it does happen to be in 2023 or is pushed back to later in the year or even released in 2024, 10th edition will certainly be coming, and it'll be a chance for them to shake up the game and give a huge release for at least one faction. Game-wise, I don't know whether they might or might not make it a hard reset, where they basically rescind all the previous codexes like they did in 8th. My guess would most likely be probably not, and more sort of just changing around the game's core rules like they did from 8th to 9th. Besides that, the new edition usually means more model kits dropping for 40k at one point than any other time. A chance to redo an entire faction in style, like they did with Death Guard or with Necrons, and the potential for some very big exciting releases such as Primarchs like they did with Mortarion or the Silent King. 9th edition's been really quite a good time to collect Necrons, at least from a model's perspective. Maybe 10th might be the same for Tyranids perhaps. Getting onto this Reddit rumour leak, they basically posted a short text summary saying that the Space Marine Codex was due out in early 2023, and said that that will be dropping at the same sort of time as the World Eaters, with a Shadow Spear type launch release, including Jump Assault Primaris Infantry. To be honest, if there's ever a Primaris kit that people have been waiting for since the new range dropped, it will be the equivalent of Primaris Assault Marines. Over the last 2 editions they have given us a whole ton of Primaris releases. It does just seem like a really obvious gap in the Space Marine range that's kind of iconic for them, and one that they hadn't got round to filling. My guess would be that if the Space Marine Codex is coming out in 2023, and then 10th edition drops sometime later in the year, it would probably be that the Space Marines 2.0 Codex would likely aim to be compatible with a new edition, and potentially could mean releasing one less Space Marine Codex than otherwise, rather than having 2 in 9th edition and 2 in 10th. From that Space Marine release, we also had rumours for things like a Melter Redemptor and a Heavy Weapons Primaris Infantry squad of some sort. I guess those plus some Jump Assault Primaris could add up to something fairly equivalent to Shadow Spear. I guess that while Space Marines will be getting something, the focus will be more on World Eaters, who, if they're having a new codex, would likely be dropping with a massive cool updated range. At the very minimum for World Eaters, I'd expect Angron, Khorne Berserkers, some sort of unique Terminators, a bunch of unique characters, and maybe a Demon Engine or two. Then they go on to mention 10th edition, which they say will be Blood Angels versus Tyranids, both of which seem like fairly plausible choices. I think Tyranids in particular are really quite likely. I'd already been suspecting this myself, to be honest. They haven't had any significant model releases for absolutely ages now. The majority of other non-Imperial factions have had something fairly interesting throughout the last couple of editions. Tyranids are quite a popular army, and it seems that they'd be an absolutely perfect target for a Necron-style range refresh. If they aren't planning on making World Eaters the antagonists of 10th, then it seems likely it would be the Tyranids. I guess in theory Drukhari or Tau might not be impossible either, but they seem less likely than Nids to me. I think the Tyranids just have a bunch more models that might be due for a replacement. And I think the Tyranids do provide quite a nice contrast against the Space Marines. Blood Angels, on the other hand, I'm sure are going to get centre stage at some stage. We saw the big Black Templar release in 9th edition, basically every one of their unique unit choices getting a Primaris style do-over. I think it sets a pretty convincing precedent for what they might do with Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, and I guess Death Watch. I feel that with all the generic Primaris kits that they've released over the past few editions, they might be slightly starting to run out of more exciting niches to explore, so might delve into the Space Marine sub-factions as a way to add more interest to the Primaris range. Perhaps the main thing about this rumour that makes me think it's a little bit less shaky is that they're saying Primaris Blood Angels would actually be in the starter box, and they do say Death Company and a Sanguinary Priest in there. And to me this just seems a little bit unlikely compared with having more generic Space Marines as they've done so for the last two starter kits. I know they did Dark Angels for that Dark Vengeance box back in 6th edition, but I feel like the main thing that they might have learned from that is that it just led to a whole load of Space Marine players having to file off the chapter markings to apply those Space Marines to their own chapter. And if you release generic Space Marines in a starter box, then everyone can buy it, not just the subset of Space Marine players who happen to play Blood Angels themselves. Maybe that's a reason to doubt the whole leak in general, but I could see it plausibly just being a paint choice for the models in the starter box. Maybe they just have the Primaris jump packs painted up as Death Company and an Apothecary as a Sanguinary Priest, and if you just use a different paint scheme, they can equally apply to any chapter. Finally, the pairing of Blood Angels versus Tyranids does seem fairly appropriate. Throughout the last few editions, they basically had stories of Blood Angels and Leviathan warring against each other. I think in one of the recent bits of fluff, they had the Leviathan almost overcoming Baal itself, and then the Blood Angels were mysteriously rescued by the demons who just happened to kill all the Tyranids so they could fight the Blood Angels themselves. I could definitely see them starring in their own starter box, though I do feel that they might have been paired against each other to the extent where the fight has got a little bit overdone now. Going into the specific model rumours, there are quite a few here for the Space Marines and Blood Angels in general. Perhaps chief amongst them are Primaris Terminators of some sort, which is a pretty interesting idea in itself. When Games Workshop unleashed Primaris back in 8th edition, I really think it was the Aggressors and Gravis armour that were supposed to be their equivalent of Terminators. They're basically big, chunky, heavily armoured models, both with power fists and light assault weapons. Though I think the overall feel of them just feels quite different. Terminator armour really is quite iconic and storied. I think since that release, lots of fans seem to really want true Primaris Terminators. Maybe not everyone who likes their firstborn more, but I feel like if done right, it really could be pretty cool. A slightly upscaled Terminator version that looks a bit more dangerous looking and perhaps a bit more posable. I feel like if Games Workshop showed a fair bit of restraint as they did with the Black Templars and basically didn't change too much, then they could resculpture and embiggen the Terminators while still keeping their iconic look. Next up, there's Jump Death Company in the mix apparently, hopefully as a full kit rather than just being upgrades for some Primaris Assault Marines. I feel like we've already had the upgrade version of Death Company though. I think if they re-released an actual Death Company kit, they would likely make the effort of actually sculpting them as Blood Angels, much with the Black Templars Crusader squad. There's a trio of new characters mentioned, a new captain sculpt, which is quite likely as most of the starter sets have always come out with one, a Primaris Sanguinary Priest, and a Death Company Chaplain. Could easily be a jump pack one, I suppose. And then really quite an interesting idea with a much bigger and more dangerous looking Sanguinor, a really massive sculpt to rival Guilliman himself. Apparently a big kit with lots of cherubs on it, and I genuinely could see them redoing him as such as a centerpiece model for a Blood Angels army. Currently this is the version of him, and he's on a 25mm base, so quite small. The lore of the Sanguinor is that he's kind of semi-mythological, manifested by the collective will of the Blood Angels as a kind of imperial demon being the reincarnation of their Primarch, though more of a mental projection than it truly representing Sanguinius being returned. I certainly could see them redoing him as a massive centerpiece model. Games Workshop does like their big snazzy centerpiece things these days. Maybe kind of similar to how the Necrons got the Void Dragon, or the Eldar avatar of Cain got big and upscaled. I think that one is quite a cool idea, and likely as close as we'd ever get to a 40k Sanguinius, though I must admit, for largely practical Space Marines, his lore is a little bit on the weird side. Otherwise, they mention new Sanguinary Guard as well, the other unique Blood Angels Jump Assault unit, and another one that I think could be very interesting as a Primaris resculpt. They just happen to have been made one of the strongest Space Marine assault units in the game at the moment, and if I had my very cynical hat on, it might be to say that they're trying to sell lots of these, only for them to be made more redundant when they release a new kit. Maybe that's a little bit tinfoil hat, but I do feel they've done it a few times in the past, where an older version of the model suddenly becomes amazing, not all that long before it's replaced. Finally, on the list of rumours, there's a Furioso Redemptor. I must admit, when rumours of that close range slash melter Redemptor came out, supposedly coming in the next Space Marine Codex, it did kind of sound a little bit like a Redemptor Furioso. I wonder whether it'd be an entirely different sculpt, or maybe just a slight variant, perhaps with an upgrade sprue or something. In any case, a bunch of cool stuff, maybe just a little bit wishlisty. Perhaps the most interesting or creative thing, if this does happen to be made up, is the Sanguinor getting to be a big centerpiece model. That's certainly not something that I'd thought that they might do, but now the idea is brought up, I can see it making a lot of sense for them. On to the bugs now, and I've got 6 new kits mentioned for them. My guess would be that this probably wouldn't be the end of it though. When Necrons and Death Guard dropped, they had far more releases than this. First up, they say a new Brood Lord in the starter set. I'm not really convinced that needs a new sculpt, to be honest. There's already a couple of variants that you can use between this and the Genestealer Cult Patriarch, but I guess if they were going for monopose models in the starter set, as they often do, then it might make sense to have a new one on that. The other rumour is new Genestealers as well. I think if they were to redo Tyranids, then that would be very likely to be on the cards. That'd certainly be cool to have in a starter set. I do wonder whether or not we might get them sooner though, with rumours of Space Hulk Kill Team at the weekend. Games Workshop Saturday reveals might have a bit of an impact as to how likely this is. Next up, they mention something called a Macrofex. The name implies to me that it'd just be a bigger Carnifex, and they do say that Old One Eye would also be Macrofex size as well, which implies that it is bigger. Again, I think that one seems believable. If the current Carnifex is the equivalent of, say, a Space Marine Dreadnought, then a Macrofex could maybe be the equivalent of a Redemptor Dreadnought. Perhaps a bigger brute force generalist with some range and melee options, as opposed to the bigger Tyrannofex, which is a bit more ranged. I guess perhaps it could be an option to have Old One Eye as a multi-build for the set. I think currently he's only represented by the regular Carnifex with one of the alternate heads. Next up, they have something called Hypergunts. Not really much elaboration as to what they are, though supposedly in the starter box. The name implies some sort of dangerous Tyranid swarm unit to go alongside Termagants or Hormagaunts, and interestingly they state an 105mm base for them. That would be really quite a big one, and it makes me wonder whether or not it could be something like a really big swarm style base, maybe representing lots of little critters that are smaller than Termagants but bigger than Rippers. That does sound like it could be quite fun depending on how it's executed. Then they mention a Zoanthrope HQ, kind of an interesting one as we already have one in the Neurothrope which can be built from the Zoanthrope box. My first thought for that one though goes to the Doom of Malantine. That was one of the old special characters from a previous Tyranid Codex that got cut because it didn't have an official model. I guess you could say that it was just a funky Neurothrope, but I think a fair few Tyranid players would quite welcome having it return as a new model that they can use, and they might just choose to give him a new model in full that's different to the standard Neurothropes. Finally, there's a new Hormagaunts as well. Again, that's something that I could definitely get on board with. The current ones do have the charming feature of wanting to fall over at the touch of a feather, as well as absolutely massively overhanging their bases, perhaps more so than just about any other model in 40k. Maybe I'm a little bit surprised not to see Termagants on the list. I think if Tyranids did have a full faction redo, I would expect to see them remade. The models are certainly very functional for big swarms, but they're also really quite old and do require a fair bit of mold line removing. Overall, again, does seem pretty plausible for a Tyranid release. The bugs certainly feel like they due a bit of attention. They haven't really had much besides Genestealer called allies for quite a long time. So overall, I'd certainly not treat any of this as particularly confirmed. I'll be interested to hear what you guys make of them down in the comments below. Do you think that these are plausible, or do you think that they've just been made up? For me, I think it would be quite a fun launch set, to be honest. We're almost bound to get Space Marines of one flavour or another on one side, and making them Blood Angels is a bit of a shake-up on having Ultramarines over the last 2 editions. On the other side, if it isn't Angron and the World Eaters, then Tyranids seem like a great choice. I think some reimagined Genestealers, new Hormagaunts, and a big scary Carnifex equivalent would be pretty fun. In any case, it's not like it's just round the corner yet. We've still got a whole load of cool stuff from 9th edition still to come. Leagues of Votan, Imperial Guard, and the like. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I do tend to post new videos just about every day. I do try and keep up with any rumours of Games Workshop releases, 40k model releases, or rules changes. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. If you have been enjoying these updates a lot, any support keeping them coming is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get to see certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.